By the end, I had come to a place of profound peace. I no longer clung to fear or bitterness. Instead, I embraced life fully, even knowing it might soon end. I wrote, "You can find your way back to God in every moment, in every small thing." This was the essence of my transformation, a shift from striving and resisting to surrendering and loving. It gave me the strength to face the inevitable, not with despair, but with grace.
Welcome to the Undead Sages podcast, where we travel back in time to talk to long-dead wise men and women. Of special interest is the question how sensitive people like you and me can live rich and meaningful lives in our uncertain times. My name is Merijn de Haen, and today we'll be talking to Etty Hillesum. Etty Hillesum was a Dutch writer, thinker, and spiritual seeker whose voice emerged from the depths of one of history's darkest chapters. Born in 1914, Etty's profound journals, written during the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands, reveal a journey of inner transformation, love, and resilience amidst unimaginable suffering. From her early struggles with emotional turmoil to her selfless work at the Westerbork transit camp, Etty's reflections offer a timeless message of hope, compassion, and the power of the human spirit to find light even in the darkest moments. Join us as we explore the life and legacy of a woman who believed that, even in the face of hatred, love must prevail. Welcome, Etty. As you're younger than me, it makes sense to call you by your first name.
Ja, natuurlijk. That's fine, Merijn. Let's talk as if we have always been friends.
Can you tell us about your childhood?
Deventer is where most of my childhood unfolded. Deventer is a quiet town with cobblestone streets and a sense of history. My father, Louis, became the headmaster of the local high school, a scholarly man who lived in books. My mother, Riva, was from Russia, full of fire and spirit. The contrast between them shaped much of the atmosphere in our home.
What was it like growing up in your household?
Lively, chaotic, and often tense. My mother struggled to adapt to life in the Netherlands after fleeing the pogroms in Russia. She had this fierce temper, a force of nature, really, but she loved us in her own way. My father, on the other hand, was patient and quiet, a steadying presence, but he could get lost in his work, detached from the storms that sometimes raged in our home. My brothers, Misha and Jaap, and I inherited some of that turbulence.
Can you tell us more about your brothers, about Misha and Jaap?
Misha was the artist, the dreamer. From a young age, his piano playing was extraordinary. He could transport you to another world with his music, but he was also fragile, both physically and emotionally. Jaap was the opposite, in many ways. Driven, focused, determined to succeed academically. He became a doctor later in life. Both of them were brilliant, but we all carried the weight of the struggles in our family. Mental health issues haunted us. My mother's outbursts, my father's quietness, Misha's fragility, it left its mark on us.
How did this environment shape you as a child?
I think it made me crave understanding. I became introspective early on, trying to make sense of the emotions swirling around me. I read voraciously. Fiction, philosophy, anything that might offer answers. I was a curious child, a bit stubborn too. And I wanted to escape the tension at home, so I threw myself into ideas, into imagining a bigger world than the one I lived in.
Did you stand out at school?
Academically, yes, I did well. But I wasn't always easy for my teachers or my peers. I had this sharp tongue, a quick mind, and a tendency to challenge authority. I think I was often a bit too intense for people. I longed for deeper connections, deeper conversations. The usual childhood friendships often felt shallow to me. I suppose I was searching for something even then.
And where did that search lead you?
Initially to Leiden, where I began studying law in university, but my heart wasn't in it. I was drawn to languages, to Russian literature, to anything that opened a window into human nature. Eventually, I made my way to Amsterdam, and that's where my life truly began to unfold.
So what prompted you to leave Deventer? Was it a simple desire for education, or was there more?
I wanted freedom. Deventer felt small to me, stifling even. I wanted to break away from the tension at home, to carve out a space for myself where I could explore who I was. Moving away was as much an escape as it was a step towards something new. Amsterdam offered possibilities, a kind of intellectual and personal liberation that I craved.
It sounds like you were on a quest for independence. Was that difficult to achieve as a young Jewish woman at the time?
Yes and no. I wasn't one to let social conventions stop me. I was fiercely determined. But of course, as a Jewish woman, I faced constraints. Anti-Semitism wasn't as overt in the Netherlands then as it would later become, but it was present. And there were expectations for women, especially in smaller towns like Deventer, to marry, to settle down. That was never my path. I had too much inside me, too much I needed to discover.
Were your parents supportive of your ambitions?
Supportive might be too strong a word. They tolerated my decisions more than embraced them. My father respected education, so he understood my desire to study. My mother, on the other hand, was more pragmatic. She wanted me to have security, a stable life. I think they both loved me in their own ways, but they didn't always understand me.
As you prepared to leave for Amsterdam, what were you feeling? Was it excitement, fear, or something else entirely?
It was a mix. I was excited, yes. Thrilled, even, at the prospect of a new chapter. But I was also afraid. Leaving home meant stepping away from the familiar, even from the chaos that had shaped me. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for in Amsterdam, only that I needed to find it. That uncertainty was both exhilarating and terrifying.
And so you left behind the life you'd known. Looking back, how do you see that moment now?
I see it as a beginning, a necessary one. I didn't fully understand it then, but leaving home set me on a path of self-discovery that shaped everything that came after. It was the first step toward becoming the woman I needed to be. The woman who could face what lay ahead with courage and love.
So you arrive in Amsterdam, full of ambition and curiosity. What was your first impression of the city?
Amsterdam felt alive in a way Deventer never could. The canals, the markets, the bustling streets. It was a city of movement and possibility. For someone like me, craving freedom and stimulation, it was intoxicating. I remember walking along the Amstel River, feeling the energy of the place seep into me. Amsterdam offered me a kind of liberation I hadn't known before.
Where did you live when you first arrived?
I lived in a small attic room on Gabriel Metzelstraat. It was modest, a bed, a desk, books everywhere. But it was my sanctuary. That little room became my world. It was where I studied, wrote, and reflected. The walls were thin, the space cramped, but it didn't matter. It was mine. And in that tiny attic, I started to piece together who I was.
You mentioned studying. What were you focused on in Amsterdam?
My formal studies were in law at first, but my interests quickly turned to languages and literature. Russian literature, in particular, captured my heart. Tolstoy, Dostoevsky. Their explorations of human nature and spirituality spoke to me deeply. But honestly, I was less concerned with earning degrees and more driven by a need to understand life. I attended lectures, read voraciously, and absorbed everything I could about philosophy, religion, and psychology.
It sounds like an intense intellectual pursuit. Did you also find time for social connections?
Oh yes, Amsterdam was a place of relationships as much as ideas. I made friends, writers, students, thinkers. My relationships, though, were often as turbulent as my inner life. I loved deeply, but I could be difficult, possessive, intense. I was constantly searching for meaning, even in love, and that made me both passionate and exhausting.
Were there particular people who had a lasting influence on you during this time?
One person stands out above all. Julius Spier. I met him in 1941 and he changed the course of my life. Spier was a psychoanalyst who had fled Germany, a student of Jung, and a man with extraordinary insight. He introduced me to myself, in a way. Through his work, his blend of analysis, spiritual psychology, and even palmistry, I began to see my inner world with clarity. He became my mentor, my guide, and in some ways, my unfulfilled love.
Tell us more about your relationship with Spier. It seems pivotal to your journey.
It was. Spier helped me confront my emotional chaos. When I first met him, I was restless, searching, and often overwhelmed by my own intensity. He challenged me to be honest with myself, to face my fears and desires, without judgment. He also introduced me to meditation and prayer, not as religious rituals, but as ways to find stillness and connect with the divine within. Our relationship was complex. I admired him deeply, even loved him, though it was never a traditional romance. He was engaged to another woman, and there were boundaries we didn't cross. But emotionally, spiritually, he was central to my life. When he died in 1942, it felt like the ground beneath me had shifted, but his teachings stayed with me.
During this time, the world was changing rapidly, with the Nazi occupation tightening its grip. How did that affect your life in Amsterdam?
At first, life went on almost as normal, or so it seemed. But the restrictions came quickly. Curfews, bans on public spaces, forced identification with the yellow star. It was like a noose tightening around us. For Jews in Amsterdam, the city began to feel like a trap. You couldn't escape the fear, the knowledge that we were being singled out, isolated. Still, I tried to live as fully as I could. I continued to write, study, and connect with others, but the weight of what was happening grew heavier every day. By 1942, I was working for the Jewish Council, a job that came with its own moral complexities.
What do you mean by moral complexities?
The Jewish Council acted as an intermediary between the Nazis and the Jewish community. On the one hand, it provided services and tried to mitigate the suffering. On the other, it was complicit in administering orders that led to deportations. Working there placed me in a constant moral dilemma. I did what I could to help, but I often felt torn, questioning whether my efforts were easing suffering or enabling it.
How did you cope with the growing pressure and danger?
I turned inward. My writing became my lifeline. Every day, I poured my thoughts into my journals, trying to make sense of what was happening and how I could remain true to myself. I also began to embrace a deeper spirituality. Prayer and meditation became essential to me, not as escapes, but as ways to ground myself, to find strength and clarity in the midst of chaos. I refused to let hatred or fear consume me. I wrote, "They can take everything from me, but they cannot take my love for life." That became my mantra. No matter how dark the world grew, I held on to the belief that love and beauty still existed, and that it was my task to find them.
Were you able to find beauty in such a difficult time?
Yes, though it wasn't always easy. I found beauty in small things. A bird outside my window, a conversation with a friend, the pages of a favorite book. Even in the darkest moments, there were glimmers of light. I learned to focus on those glimmers, to let them sustain me. It was a choice, really, to see beauty and to love life, even when it seemed absurd to do so.
How do you look back on your time in Amsterdam?
Amsterdam was where I became who I was meant to be. It was a time of growth, of discovery, of wrestling with the questions that defined my life. The city gave me freedom, but it also tested me, forcing me to confront the harsh realities of the world. Ultimately, Amsterdam taught me that freedom isn't just about physical movement or external circumstances. It's about the state of your soul, your capacity to love, and your ability to find peace within. That lesson carried me forward, even to Westerbork and beyond.
You volunteered to go to Westerbork, which was a transit camp set up by the Nazis, even though you could have remained in Amsterdam for longer. Why did you make that decision?
It wasn't an easy choice, but it was a clear one for me. I felt I couldn't turn my back on what was happening to my people. How could I stay behind in relative safety while others were being herded onto trains? I wanted to witness, to share in their fate, and to offer whatever comfort I could. I believed that my place was among them, not apart from them.
What was life like at Westerbork? What did you see and experience there?
Westerbork was a world of waiting. It was a transit camp, a place where people stayed for days or weeks before being deported to Auschwitz, Sobibor, or other death camps. The atmosphere was heavy with fear and uncertainty, but there was also a strange rhythm to it. People tried to create a semblance of normalcy. There were children playing, people laughing, even concerts performed by talented musicians. But underneath it all was the knowledge that any day, any moment, you could be called for transport. I worked in the hospital, helping the sick and comforting those who were about to be deported. It was heartbreaking work, but it also gave me a sense of purpose. I listened to people's stories, held their hands, and tried to remind them that they were still human, still loved, even in the face of unimaginable cruelty.
That must have been emotionally exhausting. How did you cope with the constant exposure to suffering?
I won't lie, it was overwhelming at times. There were moments when I thought I couldn't bear another goodbye, another train leaving full of frightened faces. But I had learned, especially in the years leading up to Westerbork, how to find strength within myself. I meditated and prayed daily, though not in a traditional sense. Prayer for me was a quiet turning inward, a moment of connection with the divine presence I believed dwelled in all of us. Writing also sustained me. I couldn't keep my journals at Westerbork, but I wrote letters, trying to record what I saw and felt. Those letters became a lifeline, a way to stay grounded and to bear witness.
What did you write about in those letters?
I wrote about the people, the mother clutching her child, the old man who still managed a kind word, the teenager who looked at the sky as if trying to memorize it. I wanted to capture their humanity, to remind myself and anyone who might read my words later that these were not just numbers or nameless victims. They were individuals, each with their own stories, their own beauty. I also wrote about the challenge of holding on to love in a place designed to strip it away. I refused to give in to hatred. It was my conviction that even in the face of evil, love must prevail. Hatred only adds to the destruction, and I didn't want to contribute to that, even in my heart.
Your refusal to hate is remarkable. How did you sustain that mindset, especially given the brutality you witnessed?
It wasn't easy. There were moments when anger surged within me, at the guards, at the system that allowed such cruelty. But I realized that hatred was a kind of poison. It would only consume me from the inside, and it wouldn't change what was happening. So I practiced seeing beyond the uniforms, beyond the roles people played. I tried to remember that even those who committed terrible acts were human, shaped by their own fears and flaws. This didn't mean excusing their actions. I saw their cruelty clearly, but I chose not to let their inhumanity rob me of my own.
As time went on, did you have a sense that your own deportation was inevitable?
Yes, I knew. From the beginning, I understood that my time at Westerbork was temporary, that eventually my name would be on the list. I didn't fear it, though. I had worked hard to prepare myself spiritually and emotionally for whatever lay ahead. I focused on the present moment, on the people around me, on the work I could do. I wrote to a friend, "I do not think of all the misery, but of the beauty that still remains." That became my guiding principle. It allowed me to live fully, even in the shadow of death.
Can you describe the day of your deportation? What was it like?
It was September 7th, 1943. My parents, my brother Misha and I were called for transport. By then, I had seen so many others leave, and I knew what it meant. We were herded onto the train, packed tightly into the cattle cars. The air was stifling, the fear palpable. People clung to their loved ones, trying to offer comfort, even as their own hearts broke. Oddly, I felt calm. I had accepted this moment long before it arrived. I even managed to write a postcard and toss it out of the train, hoping someone would find it. It said, "We have left the camp singing." That wasn't meant to deny the pain or the fear, but to affirm that, even in that moment, we could still choose dignity and grace.
What happened when you arrived at Auschwitz?
We were met with chaos, shouting guards, barking dogs, confusion. Families were separated almost immediately. I lost sight of my parents and Misha. That was the last time I saw them. The details of my time at Auschwitz are unclear, even to me now. I likely perished not long after my arrival. But what I want to leave with you is not the horror of those final days, but the spirit I carried into them.
What do you mean by that?
I mean that even in the face of death, I refused to let go of the love and gratitude I had cultivated throughout my life. I believed that life, in all its pain and beauty, was still a gift. My body may have been taken, but my spirit remained unbroken. I wrote once, "When you have an interior life, it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on." That's what I held on to in the end. The knowledge that my inner freedom could never be taken from me. It's a lesson I hope others can carry forward.
Etty, your story is one of extraordinary courage and humanity. Before we close, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes, I want people to know that even in the darkest times, we have choices. We can choose to love, to find beauty, to hold on to our humanity. Life is fragile, yes, but it is also precious. We must honor it, not by clinging to it, but by living fully and openly, even in the face of uncertainty. And if my words have meaning today, it is because I believed in the power of connection, across time, across space. Thank you for listening and for carrying my story forward.
Thank you, Etty. Your words and your spirit will stay with us, and I know they'll resonate deeply with our listeners. To everyone tuning in, thank you for joining us on this journey through Etty Hillesum's extraordinary life. Until next time, remember, even in darkness, there is light to be found.